Billionaire CEO shouted at a waitress, but what happened next will leave you speechless. The crystal chandeliers cast their golden glow across the Manhattan rooftop terrace as New York's elite mingled beneath the starlit sky. Power brokers in $1,000 suits exchanged pleasantries while champagne flutes clinked in celebration of another successful quarter. But nobody expected the evening's most dramatic moment would come from the most unlikely source. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button if you're enjoying this tale of justice served cold. Subscribe for more amazing stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat, and don't forget to share this with your friends, they need to hear this one. Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I'd love to know what you think about what unfolds tonight. Marcus Blackwood was the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he entered any room. As CEO of Meridian Industries, one of the fastest-growing tech conglomerates in the country, he'd built his reputation on ruthless efficiency and an iron fist. Tonight, surrounded by potential investors worth billions, he was in his element, until everything went sideways. The evening had started perfectly. Blackwood strutted through the crowd like he owned not just the company, but the entire city skyline stretching endlessly before them. His tailored Italian suit caught the light just right, his platinum watch gleamed with each gesture, and his confident smile never wavered as he shook hands with senators, hedge fund managers, and tech moguls who could make or break empires with a single phone call. Gentlemen, ladies, Blackwood's voice boomed across the terrace as he raised his glass, tonight we celebrate not just Meridian's success, but the future of American innovation itself. The crowd erupted in polite applause, but Blackwood was already scanning the room for his next conquest. That's when he noticed his wine glass sitting empty on the marble-topped bar. His jaw tightened imperceptibly, a tell that his closest associates had learned to fear. "Excuse me," he snapped his fingers at a young woman in the standard black and white server uniform who was quietly refilling champagne glasses nearby. "My Chateau Margaux. Where is it?" The waitress looked up, her dark eyes calm and steady. She couldn't have been more than 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and an understated elegance that somehow made her stand out among the glittering crowd. "I'll get that for you right away, sir." But Blackwood's patience had already evaporated. The investors were watching. His reputation for absolute control was on display, and any sign of weakness, even something as trivial as slow service, could cost him millions. "Right away." His voice rose, cutting through the ambient chatter like a blade. "I ordered that wine 20 minutes ago. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you understand that every person in this room represents more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes? The terrace began to quiet. Conversations faltered as heads turned toward the commotion. Camera phones discreetly emerged from designer purses and jacket pockets. This was exactly the kind of drama that would be trending on social media within the hour. The waitress remained perfectly composed, her hands steady as she set down the champagne bottle. "Sir, I understand you're frustrated." "Frustrated?" Blackwood's face flushed red as he stepped closer, his voice now carrying across the entire rooftop. "I'm not frustrated, sweetheart. I'm furious. This is a $5,000 a plate event, and you're serving wine like you're working at some dive bar in Queens." The crowd had formed a loose circle now, some guests looking uncomfortable, others clearly entertained by the spectacle. Senator Williams whispered something to his aide. The Japanese investors exchanged glances. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how this would play out. "Maybe you should stick to jobs more suited to your capabilities," Blackwood continued, his words dripping with condescension. "Because clearly, serving the people who actually matter in this city is beyond your skill set." The waitress stood there for a moment, letting his words hang in the air like smoke. The rooftop had gone completely silent except for the distant hum of traffic 40 floors below. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, frozen in place as they watched their colleague endure this public humiliation. Then, with the same calm composure she'd maintained throughout the entire tirade, the waitress looked Blackwood directly in the eyes and spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. "I own 51% of your company. The words hit the crowd like a physical force. Champagne glasses stopped halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence. Camera phones that had been recording the confrontation suddenly felt heavy in their owner's hands. The senator's aide actually dropped his notepad. Blackwood's face went from red to white in the span of a heartbeat. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. The confident swagger that had carried him through 1,000 boardroom battles evaporated in an instant. "What did you just say?" he whispered, but his voice carried in the absolute silence that had descended over the terrace. The waitress straightened her shoulders, and suddenly everyone could see it, the way she carried herself, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet authority that had been hidden beneath the server's uniform. This wasn't just any young woman trying to make ends meet in an expensive city. "You heard me correctly, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I own the controlling interest in Meridian Industries. Which means, technically speaking, you work for me." The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Blackwood's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions, confusion, disbelief, then a creeping terror as the implications began to sink in. Around them, the city's most powerful people stood frozen, their champagne growing warm in their hands as they processed what they'd just witnessed. "That's impossible," Blackwood finally managed, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "You're a waitress. You're nobody. I know every major shareholder in my company." The young woman reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded document, yellowed with age but bearing official seals and signatures. She handed it to Senator Williams, who happened to be standing closest to her. "Senator, would you mind reading the highlighted section aloud? I think everyone here deserves to hear this." Williams unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, his political instincts telling him he was about to become part of something that would dominate headlines for weeks. He cleared his throat and began to read in his practiced courtroom voice. "Last will and testament of Jonathan Meridian, co-founder of Meridian Industries. To my beloved daughter, Elena Meridian, I bequeath my entire stake in the company, 51% of all shares, to be held in trust until her 25th birthday, at which time she may claim full ownership and voting rights." The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. Elena Meridian. The name sent shockwaves through everyone present because they all knew the story. Jonathan Meridian had been the visionary genius behind the company's early innovations, the man whose patents and algorithms had built the foundation of what would become a tech empire. But he died in a car accident 7 years ago, and everyone assumed his shares had been absorbed by the company or sold off to private investors. "Continue reading, Senator," Elena said quietly, her eyes never leaving Blackwood's increasingly pale face. Williams squinted at the document. "Furthermore, should any individual attempt to claim ownership or control of the company through fraudulent means, my daughter is hereby granted immediate authority to remove said individual from all positions of power within the organization." Blackwood stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a cocktail table. "This is a fake. Some elaborate con job. Jonathan Meridian never had a daughter." "Actually, he did." The voice came from Margaret Chen, the lead investor from Pacific Ventures, who had been quietly observing from the edge of the crowd. She stepped forward, her smartphone already displaying a series of documents. "We've been investigating some irregularities in Meridian Industries' leadership structure for the past 6 months. Elena contacted us 3 weeks ago." Elena nodded gratefully toward Margaret. "My father kept my existence private to protect me from exactly this kind of corporate warfare. I was raised by my aunt in Portland, went to college under my mother's maiden name, and only learned about my inheritance when the trust lawyers contacted me on my 25th birthday last month." "But why?" asked David Rothschild, the hedge fund manager whose firm had been considering a major investment. "Why work as a waitress? Why not just walk into the boardroom and claim what's yours?" Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. "Because I needed to see what kind of man was running my father's company. I needed to understand how someone with no legitimate claim to power had managed to convince everyone he belonged there." She turned back to Blackwood, who was now gripping the marble bar for support. You see, Marcus, I've been watching you for weeks. I've seen how you treat the cleaning staff, how you berate your assistants, how you take credit for innovations you had nothing to do with. Tonight was just the final test. The Japanese investors were getting suspicious anyway, added Kenji Tanaka, stepping forward with his own smartphone displaying financial records. Your quarterly reports haven't been adding up. Revenue streams that don't exist, patents filed under false pretenses, partnerships with companies that turned out to be shell corporations. Blackwood's legs gave out, and he sank into a nearby chair, his head in his hands. You don't understand. I built this company. I made it what it is today. No, Elena's voice was firm but not unkind. You've been living off my father's legacy while destroying everything he stood for. Meridian Industries was supposed to be about innovation that helps people, not just profit margins and stock prices. Margaret Chen was already making phone calls, her voice crisp and professional as she spoke to what sounded like legal teams and board members. The other investors had formed small clusters, their conversations animated as they discussed the implications of this revelation. The SEC is going to want to talk to you, Marcus, Senator Williams said grimly, folding the will and handing it back to Elena. Financial fraud, identity theft, securities violations, you're looking at serious federal charges. Elena watched as security guards, who had been discreetly summoned by the catering manager, approached Blackwood. But instead of satisfaction, her expression showed something closer to sadness. I didn't want it to end this way, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, you'd surprise me tonight. That you'd show some basic human decency to someone you thought was beneath you. But you couldn't even manage that. Blackwood looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Elena, please. We can work something out. I can change. I can be better. The time for that was 7 years ago, when you first walked into my father's office and convinced the interim board that you were the right person to lead his company. Elena's voice was steady, but there was pain beneath the surface. You had 7 years to honor his memory, to build something worthy of his vision. Instead, you turned it into your personal empire. The security guards were at Blackwood's shoulders now, waiting for Elena's signal. Around them, the party had transformed into something resembling a crime scene, with investors and politicians already calculating how this scandal would affect their own interests. Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her, some shocked, some calculating, some genuinely impressed by the evening's dramatic turn. These were the people who would help her rebuild what Blackwood had corrupted, who would support her vision for what Meridian Industries could become. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying the authority that had been her birthright all along, I think it's time we discussed the future. The security guards escorted Blackwood toward the elevator, his designer shoes scraping against the marble as he struggled to maintain what little dignity remained. But Elena raised her hand, stopping them just before the doors opened. Wait, she said, her voice carrying across the terrace. Marcus, there's something else you need to hear. Blackwood turned, hope flickering in his eyes like a dying candle. Perhaps she was having second thoughts. Perhaps there was still a way out of this nightmare. Elena walked over to the bar where a laptop had been discreetly set up by Margaret Chen's team. With a few keystrokes, she projected financial documents onto the large screen that had been displaying the company's promotional materials just an hour earlier. Everyone here deserves to know the full extent of what's been happening, Elena announced, her voice steady and professional. Marcus, you've been siphoning money from employee pension funds to cover your gambling debts. $12 million over the past 2 years. The crowd gasped collectively. Senator Williams stepped closer to examine the documents, his face growing darker with each line he read. These are federal crimes, son. You're not just looking at corporate fraud anymore. That's not all, Elena continued, clicking to the next screen. The revolutionary AI algorithm that Meridian Industries has been licensing to Fortune 500 companies. The one that's generated over $200 million in revenue this year. It was actually developed by my father 6 months before his death. Marcus has been selling my father's work and claiming it as his own innovation. David Rothschild whistled low under his breath. The patent filings, the licensing agreements, if those are fraudulent, every company that's paid for that technology has grounds for massive lawsuits. Blackwood's face had gone completely white. Elena, please. I can pay it back. All of it. Just give me time. Time. Elena's laugh was bitter. You had 7 years, Marcus. 7 years to do right by the 1,500 employees who trusted you with their livelihoods. 7 years to honor the memory of a man who believed technology should make the world better, not just make rich people richer. She clicked to another screen, this one showing employee satisfaction surveys and turnover rates. Under your leadership, Meridian Industries has had a 40% annual turnover rate. People are leaving because they can't stand working for a company that's lost its soul. Kenji Tanaka stepped forward, his expression grave. Miss Meridian, on behalf of the Tokyo Investment Group, I want to formally apologize. We should have done more due diligence before considering our partnership with Mr. Blackwood. You weren't the only ones fooled, Elena replied graciously. Marcus is very good at presenting a convincing facade. But facades don't last forever. Margaret Chen closed her phone and approached Elena with a document folder. The emergency board meeting has been called for tomorrow morning. The interim board members who originally appointed Marcus have agreed to step down, and the major shareholders are prepared to recognize your rightful ownership. Elena nodded, then turned back to address the crowd. I want everyone here to understand something. This isn't about revenge. This is about restoration. My father built Meridian Industries on 3 principles: innovation that serves humanity, respect for every person who contributes to our success, and transparency in all our dealings. She gestured toward the city skyline, where millions of lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Every one of those lights represents someone whose life could be improved by the technology we develop. That's what my father believed, and that's what I intend to honor. Senator Williams approached Elena with obvious respect. Miss Meridian, what are your immediate plans for the company? First, we're going to make sure every employee gets back what was stolen from their pension funds, with interest, Elena said firmly. Second, we're implementing a profit-sharing program so that the people who actually create our innovations benefit from their success. And third, we're establishing the Jonathan Meridian Foundation to provide technology education in underserved communities. The investors exchanged glances, clearly impressed by her vision and preparedness. This wasn't some naive young woman who'd stumbled into power, this was someone who'd been planning and preparing for this moment. What about the AI patents? Asked David Rothschild. We're going to honor every existing contract, but we're also going to open source the basic algorithms so that smaller companies and researchers can build on my father's work, Elena replied. Innovation shouldn't be hoarded, it should be shared. Blackwood, who had been listening to this exchange with growing desperation, suddenly broke free from the security guards and rushed toward Elena. You can't do this. You'll destroy everything I've built. But before he could reach her, Kenji Tanaka and Senator Williams stepped between them, their combined presence enough to stop him in his tracks. Marcus, Elena said quietly, you didn't build anything. You've been living in a house of cards, and tonight the wind finally blew. The security guards took hold of Blackwood again, more firmly this time. As they led him toward the elevator, he called out one last time, this isn't over, Elena. I'll fight this in court. Elena watched the elevator doors close, then turned back to the crowd with a sad smile. Actually, it is over. The FBI will be at your apartment within the hour, Marcus. The evidence is overwhelming, and the witnesses are numerous. As if summoned by her words, several federal agents in dark suits emerged from the stairwell, their badges gleaming under the chandeliers. They moved efficiently through the crowd, taking statements and collecting evidence. Margaret Chen approached Elena with a champagne flute. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. To my father's legacy, Elena replied, accepting the toast. And to everyone who believes that business can be a force for good in the world. The crowd raised their glasses in unison, and for the first time all evening, the atmosphere felt genuinely celebratory. Elena looked out over the city that would soon know her name not as a waitress who'd been humiliated, but as the rightful heir who'd reclaimed her father's vision. Tomorrow would bring challenges, board meetings, legal proceedings, the massive task of rebuilding a company's culture. But tonight, justice had been served, and the future looked brighter than the Manhattan skyline stretching endlessly before them. Sometimes the most powerful moments come from the quietest voices. Elena's story reminds us that true strength isn't about shouting the loudest or wielding power over others, it's about standing up for what's right, even when you're standing alone. In a world that often rewards arrogance and cruelty, her grace under pressure and commitment to justice shine like beacons of hope, proving that integrity and compassion will always triumph over greed and selfishness in the end.